Welcome to another episode of the ABCs of ERP and Beyond. As ever, my name is Peter Nicholson and I'm joined by my fellow co-host Nirav Shah. How are you today?
Good, Peter. Not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. What are we talking about today? So in this episode, we'll be discussing top 5 scenarios for a
Yeah,
distributor to test during the user acceptance testing phase of ERP implementation. I guess really it's important to say that how important the UAT phase is. I mean, it's a critical phase in the ERP system. Um, it ensures that the ERP system meets the business requirements and functions effectively and functions as expected before they go live. So this phase is normally at the latter end of an implementation, but it's probably the one that can have the most significant impact on the success and failure of an ERP. So I guess you'd agree with that.
100% wholeheartedly. This phase should not be skipped at all. This there's I feel like there's two or three main events in an ERP implementation that you continue to build for. Um, the very first one is the kickoff. You build for the kickoff, right? Before you start the implementation, you're just doing a lot of work with your partner. You're doing a lot of work internally, right? Making sure you have the right fit, you have people, process, and product. So you build up to the kickoff. The second one is when you kick off the project, you're building to a good UAT test or a pilot test. Okay, that's the second main kind of event here. And then the third big main event is the go live, right? Then that's assuming the pilot test has went well, right, and has been approved. And the third one is the go live. So today is how we should build to the pilot test, and during the pilot test, at least for a distributor, what are the main things that we want to test that we want that we don't want to oversee or take it lightly. We really want to hammer those processes, that we're able to do it, and we've accounted for any exceptions, right? And if there's gaps, let's be honest about it. Let's document it so we know whether are we ready to go live or not. So I
Mhm.
think this topic is so important, and I think probably maybe that it's just me. Other people may have a different opinion about this. I think out of the three main events, this pilot test is the absolute most critical, right?
Mhm.
Because you've done so much work leading up to a pilot test, essentially. So I think this is if done correctly, this is a sure way you're going to have a successful go live. If done incorrectly, taking shortcuts, chances are high that there could be there's going to be a bumpy, rocky go live at that point, where it might leave a bad taste on users' mouth and the steering committee's mouth, and the partners left scrambling to essentially provide support and gaps on the fly, essentially. So this is, I think, a very, very important topic today.
Yeah, I think because it's so far down the road as well, it's there's a lot already invested. So I think you need to realize that when you get to this phase, it's not a rush to the goal line the goal. If the goal line is the go live date, um,
Yep.
if UAT phase takes several months even,
Right. Right.
then so be it because it needs
Yeah.
to pass this part
It
for the
has
go
to.
live to go smoothly and successfully. So
It has to, for sure.
should we dive in then? They're not in any particular order, but I think the first point here is at the beginning of the UAT phase here, which is that idea of completing the pilot scripts. So let's just step through what we mean by that. So when we say we need to complete pilot scripts, what exactly we're trying to achieve here?
Yeah, so the pilot scripts is a culmination of all the business processes, okay, and the software functionality coming together, right? And it's taking a fine comb, okay? Actually, let me back up. So you kick off the implementation and you start to do the data migration process. In parallel, you're learning the system, right? Learning what out of the box processes are in the ERP system. it's putting in a new customer, putting in a sales quote, putting in a sales order, converting it, planning it out, creating a purchase order, fulfilling it, warehousing it, shipping, packing, right? Invoice, ARAP, all those processes are you're learning on how you do it to the new system, and then you're applying that, doing some business modeling of your processes to the ERP system, and it's at that time in that training, what we call the key user training phase, could last anywhere from 2 weeks, depending if you're like a small implementation, right, all the way up to like 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, depending on the complexities and the different functionality and things like that that you're learning in the new system. But during that time, it's really critical to start documenting what we need to ensure we're doing in the system. And some of this could be done even before pilot test or even before kickoff. But what I tell all my clients when we implement is, and we say day one, is you're doing something, whether you're doing it in your current system, or you're writing something down, or you're looking at another system, right? You're doing a ton of things for 8 hours, if not more, right? Document all that, right? Document it. What are you doing? Like, what do we need to do in the system, right? You're doing this outside, so do we need to do that in the system? And that's all the key users, the managers that are in the system. That should be the message from day one. Because we're trying to, as you're implementing a new system, taking what you're doing now, making sure there's no gaps, and following a new process, maybe a more efficient process, and making sure we're crossing off the list everything that users are doing. Okay.
Hmm.
So it's an ongoing process from day one to continue to document what are the business processes in each department, get very granular, right? Um, and ensure everything leading up to the pilot test, again, this event, is that can we take everything that we documented in Excel or wherever we're documenting our UAT processes, can we take that, and if we all two were to get into a room during pilot test, a conference room, a UAT, and we put that Excel file up on, let's say, the screen, someone is proctoring that Excel file, and the partner says, okay, let's do this specific function. Let's put in a customer. Let's update the credit limit to, let's reduce the credit limit because this customer had, a bad paying record.
Hmm.
So specific, right?
Yeah.
Can we do that? And who's going to do it, right? And now the user needs to show that they could do that. And if they could show that they could have proficiency and they could do that, let's cross it off the list. Okay,
Hmm.
we could do that, right? And now we get down to the next scenario. And then we go down to the third scenario, the fourth scenario, the fifth scenario. But the whole idea is, right, is to get all user feedback documented into this, what we call UAT script, user acceptance testing script. So when we go live, there's no question, did we test this or not? Did we think about this process or not? Was this approved or not? Right? It's very transparent, and that we are accomplishing the customer's goals, right? The implementation goals at the end of the day, that the users feel comfortable that they are prepared for go live, or the user is saying, hey, we missed a big process here, there's a gap, and we need to revisit this. Let's parking lot this specific task or process, and then after pilot test, let's come up with a better solution, or let's come up with a solution, and then let's do a mini pilot later on, right? So this is all to be as specific as possible, that you are validating your system, all the discussions that have taken place during key user training, with your data, with the processes that that your company uses. Essentially, it's all being validated in this pilot event, or this user acceptance testing event, which is super critical to ensure that you start day one with that mentality. What are we building towards? We're building towards a pilot,
Mm.
full pilot test, and that we are looking to ensure that we are successful in that pilot test and all of our bases are covered.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that user feedback is so important because It's the people that are going to be using the system day to day. And
Yeah.
I think it's important that those are the same people that have been involved with the ERP implementation project from the beginning through the design phase as well, because that's where they actually can have the input, the day to day specific processes or tasks that happen. So
Yeah.
when they're involved in design phase, then when it comes to um, documenting this and doing these pilot scripts, it's not new to them. So they've already seen this. They kind of know what to expect. You can't test something if you don't have an expectation of what good looks like.
Yeah.
So, you need to make sure that this feedback is from people that are not only doing it, are going to be doing it, also the people that have been on the whole journey of this.
Yep. So well said there. Well said there for sure. It's very critical, and just, this has to be the mindset that let's make sure that our first step, the biggest milestone here is let's have a pilot test that thoroughly represents our business and thoroughly represents how we're going to be using the system and gives us a good indication that we're going to have a successful deployment.
Point number two, we have reporting and business reports. So there's a lot here. Like every single company has a bazillion reports for all different things. Um, some more crucial than others, but this is important for user acceptance testing. All the different reports, whether they're internal reports or whether they're customer facing, order confirmations, invoices. This is a really important part. Like a lot of places are bogged down with paperwork, and the more you can digitize that, the better, but it does put more strain on the ERP implementation of these
Mhm.
reports now going through the system. So let's spend a couple of minutes just talking about what we need to consider when we're talking about reports.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me paint let me paint a real terrible picture of what a go live in situation could potentially happen if this is not tested. You put in, let's say, 100 sales orders a day, and you need to go and send a confirmation to customers. And on looking down that process, let's say you do 100 shipments a day, and you need to send a sales invoice to customers so they could pay your invoice. Your company looks professional, right? Your customers, have that. They see the same type of reports that or a professional document sent to them, right? Now here's where it gets ugly. Say we don't test any of these reports that are customer facing or vendor facing, and we start sending order acknowledgments to customers, or we start sending invoices to customers that are complete trash. That there's no logo is missing. It doesn't have the right level of data. There's no pricing on the documents, right? You're missing salesperson code. You don't have the right format of what your customers used to. That's gonna bring so much strain to the users because they're gonna start getting so many calls from customers saying, "What is this? This form does not resemble the form that you usually send me. Am I supposed to pay this thing?" Your reputation as a business could potentially start going down, right? Because 9 times out of 10, most in most ERP implementations, and talk from my customers from an ERP implementation standpoint, we usually always do some level of enhancements or slight modifications to the out of the box reports. Right? You talk about the sales order confirmation, the sales quote, the purchase order, the sales invoice, the credit memo, right? The AP check. There's some tweaking that happens to it to make sure it represents the customer and the format of documents they currently use. And if that's not tested with the way they process data, right? So first you're going for the look and feel of it, and then it's how does the data present on it. So if you don't test that during pilot test, you could potentially start spitting out documents to customers, especially with a lot of automation now, sending emails automatically. So a lot of times these documents don't even appear on the screen anymore. They're automatically sent behind the scenes straight to the customer, right? And they're seeing information that probably doesn't even make any sense to them. And now, in turn, that's going to cause a lot of back and work, back and forth discussion, emails. That's then going to delay them from paying you potentially
Mhm.
or acknowledging the order, right? And slow down the business, slow down people
Mhm.
at the end of the day. So it's important to really take time to understand the report's life cycle in an ERP implementation and to test it very thoroughly in a pilot test. So
Mhm.
the life cycle that I'm kind of explaining is the first one you have is decide the reports that you want to use, enhance the reports or mock them up, have your partner complete the modifications or enhancements, then test it, and then put it up against any type of exceptions that you do. Let's say you need to put a comment on a specific sales line, right? Well, how does that comment appear? Where should it appear,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Let's say if you have to add a discount, well, how does a discount appear on the report? Did we test that? Right? What if what if you had to add a tax? What are some lines taxable or not taxable? Well, how's the customer supposed to know that on an invoice that this line was taxable or not, that this other line was not taxable? Maybe you need that type of granularity. So it's really important to test reports as
Mm.
part of your pilot scripts.
I've had it before in the previous place I used to work. They had a huge AR issue, um, and we finally found out what the issue was. That all the invoices going out the system from I don't know when didn't have the due date on it. So
Yeah, that sounds like a
that'll do
big one.
it. Yeah. So when that
They're
was
getting,
fixed,
yeah. The checks start coming in the door.
yeah. Oh, we have to actually pay it. Oh.
Yeah, yeah, we have to. Oh, this is just not reference only. Oh, geez, okay.
uh,
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah, so it's an important point that I think it's often gets forgotten about. Saying, oh, there's just
mm,
reports and there's just more focus on the process. But there's two parts of a pilot test: is inputs and outputs, and you got to focus on the inputs. But what's the output? The output should also be some of these documents that go to the customers.
mhm,
And you have to take a sharp eye or fine comb to make sure that those are ready to go for pilot. And if they're not ready to go for pilot, be honest about it and say we failed. These reports failed our pilot test, and we need to go back and do some work with it. Because the sooner you know that, right, and you get that resolved, that's one thing you could check off for go live.
mhm,
Right? It's like anything else, right? A doctor would say, let's say if you're like starting to get like high cholesterol, well, the doctor's giving you some advice saying, hey, start exercising, right? So if you start exercising now, right, you have a chance of having a healthy self, healthy version of you, right? Essentially, so it's kind of feel like in the same concept. Is like, hey, you have this chance, this pilot test, to evaluate how healthy the implementation is so far, right? And if it's
mm.
teetering on one side or another, well, you have this chance right here if you really take a good hard um, you know um, review of the pilot test and make the proper adjustments and corrections to go live from it.
Number three, sales pricing and vendor pricing as well. So UAT phase, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, this is another big one. It's sales pricing and vendor pricing is the livelihood, if you will, on margins, right? If you don't have a full understanding of how pricing works in the ERP system, 10 times out of 10, you're not going to have the right pricing in the ERP system. And you're not going to have the expected output in terms of when you're putting in a sales order, what the price should be, when you're putting in a purchase order, what the price should be, right? So really test that. Make sure you understand first the ERP system and how the pricing logic works. Then have that conversation with your partner to ensure that they understand what your pricing is and how it's configured and what exceptions there are, right? And then bring that into the ERP system and test it, right? Examples of some of this is like you have standard pricing, you have base pricing, book pricing, distributor pricing, cost plus pricing, right? And then you could have promotional pricing, campaigns that you run, right? That's part of pricing, believe it or not. Like, we need to test that.
Mm,
And then what about any type of price adjustments we have to do on the fly or exceptions to the rule, right? Maybe a customer falls into multiple different categories of pricing based on the class of item that they're selecting, right? Well, did we test that, or are we just testing simple scenarios? So really focus in on that because I can tell you, day one, as soon as you hit people are just so interested in putting in the sales order. And they're if that if they're not looking at pricing and the pricing not set up correctly, you might be giving wrong pricing to customers.
Mm,
So and vendors.
mm. I think also it has a knock on effect to any other integrations you might have, and we'll probably touch upon this later on. But if you're also looking at implementing an OCR piece of software, or even EDI, you're going to have mismatches. If the
Right.
pricing isn't set correctly, then you run the risk of um, those kind of failing. We know that OCR and EDI is a way of getting more autonomy into the sales process, and you're not going to have that if you haven't got the structure and everything set correctly in your system. You know, the amount of exceptions that you have to manage goes through the roof.
Hmm.
So, and it all goes back to um, solid pricing, foundational pricing is correct, complete
Hmm.
during this phase.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So test, 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 and it shouldn't just be one line on your pilot script. Sales pricing. It should
Hmm.
be broken down by different type of price examples.
Hmm.
What type of order you're putting in, what the quantity you're putting in, what the expected price is. Can we do that in the ERP system? So get as thorough as possible as you can on sales pricing and vendor pricing testing.
Number four, inventory planning. So again, UAT process here. What are we looking for when we're testing this?
We're looking at, can we day one, if we don't have an item in stock for a sales order, can we plan it effectively to purchase it from a vendor, receive it in on time, and then ship it to the customer for an on time due date? Can we do that day one? Right? And that's a loaded kind of statement I just said, right? There's a lot of different processes there. But in the root of it is, if we don't have something on hand when we put in a sales order, can we plan it? Can we plan it? How would I know that I need to order it? And that needs to be tested, right?
Hmm.
Pilot test, whatever is a couple days, if it's a week, whatever it is, are just so controlled, right? They're just controlled environments. You don't see a lot of variables, right? Like you do like in a fluid system that's running day to day, right? You're setting your examples up and you know what the expected output is and stuff like that. But this is where you got to have to be a little creative. Set the system up to see, okay, if we did not have this on hand, or if we do have it on hand, and now there's multiple orders that need it, how do I know that the order right behind it is going to be planned on time to receive the inventory to ship it out? Or that, let's say if you do have something on order, if the quantity changes of the original demand or the due date changes, how does that impact the
Mm.
supply line? How do I adjust for that? What do I do in the system? Right? That's more day to day type stuff, right? Because pilot tests are so controlled, sometimes easy to forget about that. Situations that you can't control is when the customer changes their order, they change the due dates, the vendors change their supply dates, right? So it's really important to understand how to do that, how to plan the inventory. Now, some customers, they're coming off of a system where they're already using MRP and MPS, right? MPS being master production scheduling, MRP being materials requirements planning. And if they're already using it, that's great. That's amazing. They already have one leg up. They understand, these complex algorithms. That's phenomenal. But if you're assuming that just because you know that how to use it, that you're going to be able to easily transition and use it in the new ERP system, I would say you're wrong. It's there's slight differences in every system that run MRP and MPS. Fundamentally, it's the same. It has to follow the same algorithm, right? You have on-hand quantity, you have demand, and then you have supply, you have due dates, and it gives you suggestions and exceptions, and you manage those. But really take time to understand, how the new ERP system is going to work and how you react. How do you supply? How do you take on those suggestions? So when you do have changes in demand, or you have new demand that doesn't have inventory, day one you're able to run it, understand it, kick off your purchase orders. Right? There is no delays there essentially, right? Or you could be coming off of a more custom reporting process, which is totally acceptable. And actually, in fact, depending on the size of the company, sometimes I recommend that. and say, hey, if you're already using a planning report, we could easily take out the demand data and on-hand inventory data and due date data, put it into an Excel file, or put it into Power BI or another BI tool or something that's the company's familiar with, to use that same process and plan by using a report method. But at that case, you have to manually create the purchase order, which is fine, right? But maybe phase two is where we make it a little bit more automated and do some more stuff in the system. But be honest about it, document it on the pilot test, and really thoroughly test it.
Do you think, in terms of thoroughly testing, you should maybe brainstorm potential issues that a business might have? So, I'm
Absolutely.
just thinking, if you're a manufacturing business, for example, is it worth testing a machine breakdown and how that's going to impact on
And
inventory
capacity. And yep,
and
exactly.
capacity?
And how does that impact capacity? What does that do to my load? Do I have to take this one guy that now is scheduled to work on this machine that's down? How do I take him and move him to another work center or machine, right? To you
Mm,
make sure his time is utilized for 100%. Absolutely. It's the more thorough you are in your pilot testing scripts, and you account for these different exceptions or things that happen, that can happen, that will impact, the process operation. But the user, when that happens, how does the user react in the system, the new system, is the key. So that's why we need to make sure the pilot tests are, up to date.
mhm. Number five, closely linked here, I guess. What is your back order process? So, how do we test this?
Yeah, it's so critical, right? So you have planning that you're going to plan it out, but what about the other identifiers, right? How will shipping know, hey, this has come in now
Mm,
for an order that we did not have inventory for early on? Let me start preparing the shipment. Let me start arranging the logistics. Let me create the picks to go pick the item so it could come to my shipping dock and I can start shipping it out, right? What is your back order process, right? It's not going to be always clean where you have inventory available for a new order that comes in so you can ship it out that day, right? It's not going to be that clean. Most of the time, it's going to be exceptions where you're going to have 25, 30, 100, 1,000 orders that you need to consistently see or have the system somehow automate that back order process so you know what you need to ship because inventory has come in and the due date is about to approach.
mm,
So those orders don't get lost in like a black hole or like a blind spot. So what
mhm,
is that, right? So those orders, if it's not available today and that order is coming late, there's a notification that happens either to the sales rep or the CRM team or somebody to maybe adjust the due date for the customer to move it out a little bit. So
mhm,
when you go run your back order process again and inventory does come in, now that order will appear on the back order list. It's available to ship. Let's pick it from the warehouse and ship it out the door. So the
mm,
back order process is huge. That's one place, if that's not fully discussed and fully understood, could become a big blind spot in the process. And now all of a sudden you have all these orders that are backed up. Customers are calling saying, "What's the status of our orders?" Right? But nobody knows. Nobody knew about it because they didn't have a back order process.
mm,
They actually came aware of that because the customer called, and that's the
mm.
last thing you want when the customer calls you and tell about what's going on with the order.
Yeah. I always say, when the customer's having to contact you, you've already lost.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
And I guess it depends on what you're coming from, what kind of system you're coming from, because you might have a completely manual based process here around back orders. And how do you now transition to a system that can, at least you can now lean on to take that burden off you? Because you need to think about how you prioritize inventory as it comes in. So you might have something where you should have it on the shelf, you haven't, you've now got back orders, then you have inventory come in, but whilst you're waiting for it to come in, you're continually putting more and more back orders on. So now what do you do in terms of prioritizing which ones you're going to clear, which ones you're not going to? And some of that can be, I know from experience here, it's kind of, you have to pick and choose which people you're going to let down and which people you're going to fulfill.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's all this nitty gritty that you need to really start prodding and picking apart when you're testing. This is the point of this kind of phase.
absolutely.
We got time for one bonus one. I know it's the idea of this is top five, but I've decided to make an executive decision, changing it top six. um, integrations to third party solutions. I'm going to stick that in as a sixth one. So I'm talking about in terms of linking to other software platforms you might have. You might have a CRM system, you might have a separate marketing, you might want to link it to retail e-commerce. So how do you see this part within the UAT phase?
Yeah, it's woven in. It's part of the fabric of the pilot test, right? It's just not pure, "Well, how do we do this in the system XYZ? How do we do this in the system? How do we do this in the system?" It's how do we do this in the system because maybe we need to give data to another system in this way, or once we receive data in from this system, we have to do this with this data in the ERP system, right? It's really being very thorough and understanding the inputs and outputs, because these are all internal customers of the ERP system, right? It's either you're taking in some data or you're giving out some data, essentially. So it's understanding what does that full process map look like, right? To when you fully go into a pilot test, it's just not ERP, but what are these other solutions that need to talk to the ERP? I mean, you also need to test that, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we break out the pilot test. So you may just say we're only focusing on the ERP system right now for our pilot test, and we're going to have a follow-up pilot test on our third-party solutions as it relates to the ERP system, which is fine, acceptable. But let's make that decision, right? So we understand a whole different set of pilot scripts are related just for the integration versus just for the ERP, right? And nowadays with the openness of all open platform ERP systems, right? Creating APIs very easily, these integrations that are available out of the box for these third party solutions. It just creates for a more robust experience, an end-to-end experience for customers. So we need to kind of make sure we dot the i's and cross the t's, that we have that as part of our pilot script.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's you've got to remember also that these integrations to other software platforms, they are operational themselves. So we're only really talking about the connectivity and integration point. So as much as it is an important thing, um, it's also worth bearing in mind that it might not be priority number one, as we've
Right.
already talked about in terms of pricing, inventory management. Like get those in-house business processes done, knowing that your marketing team and your sales guys, they can continue to use the CRM platform. There might be a period of time where it's not got the nice connectivity um, with the ERP, but that's coming.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's interesting to pull that out.
Yeah.
It's important, but it might not be business critical for
Right.
like if you were to have a couple of phases of UAT,
Yeah.
that might be put into phase two there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a great bonus one because there's more and more integrations out there now, and have to be considered.
Mm. So have we got any kind of points here that would cover all of the six points that we discussed? I guess I've heard we said quite a few times like be honest and open and get feedback from people. So I'm going to throw that one out there. I think getting feedback from everyone, you have to have that buy-in.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's an important one. Have you got any others that might be overarching over all of this?
Yeah, I think it's just this is a collaboration, right? It's a collaboration to ensure that everyone's working towards that final event, which is the go live, right? And the last thing you want during a go live is where the main actors or the main people as part of this play or presentation or event are not ready, right? That's the last, that's, you don't want to see failure. You don't want to see people not succeed in their jobs and not succeed in what they have to do, right? This is the opportunity to use to really thoroughly test and saying, okay, are we ready? Are we not ready? And if we're not ready, what do we have to concentrate on to get ready? Right? And a lot of
Hmm.
times customers will say, no, 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 let's just push and go live and go live. But their pilot test was a complete failure. It's a complete failure. And in that case, I'll probably tell you, many, many times over again that customer is going to have a very low adoption rate. a very low return on investment on their system. Okay. They're not going to see the successes that they first wanted to when they embarked on this journey.
Mhm.
So just take an extra 3 weeks or an extra month to correct these issues that come out of a pilot test, to get everybody prepared, to get your reports ready to go, to make sure the integrations are working. So when you go live, right, it creates that excitement that the system is actually humming and firing on all cylinders. And if there's a few things that pop up here or there, right, that's normal. And your partner will be there to help you correct those, or you're going to have power users that will be able to help correct those, right? Because then you're going to start taking ownership of your system faster, increase that ROI, increase the adoption rate, right? And keep focusing on your data, keep focusing on building your business, and you know, looking at the technology that you implemented in a positive light.
I agree, and I think also you need to see this as the like by the time you got to the go live is going live on a successful implementation. It's not like going live, oh, will it work, will it won't? Like
Yeah.
if you've got those doubts, then you need to take a step back. You're not going live
E-
yet.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think this was a great episode, to talk about that, this event. And I think there's probably things outside of this, Peter, that we could probably talk about, just in terms of a kickoff and, go lives and there's probably other areas of pilot tests that we'll probably talk about too, down the road. But I think this is a great starting point, especially for distribution companies to focus in on this. These elements, I think, will help your pilot test go smooth, have a successful pilot test, right, and ultimately get you started preparing for your go live.
I completely agree. Wise words as ever, Nirav Shah. So thank you once again,
Hey,
and
thank you.
until next time, have a good one.
Absolutely, absolutely.